Coming up on Capitol Crossfire, the Hill sees possible party infighting as President Biden lobbies his agenda. Immigration and issues at the border are still a national conversation, and a Facebook whistleblower faces off in a congressional testimony. Joining us from the left, Louie, Kahn, and from the right, Patrick Burland. And I'm your moderator, Jessica Nix. From the GWTV studios in Washington, D.C., this is Capitol Crossfire. This summer, Capitol Hill was buzzing with legislation. We saw proposals like the ambitious infrastructure bill and a pricey reconciliation spending bill. Infighting in the Democratic Party from progressives to moderates show a possible fractured left 1 year out from the midterm elections. Can Republicans capitalize on the infighting to take back the House and Senate, or are they just as fractured? And is the infighting from the left standing in the way of President Joe Biden's agenda? Our student panel is here to discuss this and more. On the left, Louie Kahn, a senior political communications student and political science major from Burbank, California. Louie is the former GW College Democrats president. On the right, Patrick Burland. Patrick is a senior political science major from Woodbridge, Connecticut. Patrick is the chair of College Republicans. Patrick, Louie, it is my understanding that you are both roommates, so I hope we can find some consensus today, or at least our audience may see a little roommate showdown. But thank you both for joining us today, and we're going to get started with Capitol Hill. So one of President Biden's biggest agenda pieces is a massive infrastructure bill. This summer, the Senate bypassed committees with a bipartisan negotiation group that created a bill similar to Biden's proposal, but left out some of his loftier goals to bring the price point down to $550 billion of new spending for roads, bridges, and broadband. The Senate passed the bill, but now the House has some negotiation work because most of their priorities did not make the Senate bill. But the billion-dollar question is, how will the government pay for the plan? Enter a reconciliation spending bill. In a split 50-50 Senate, Democrats need Republicans to sign onto their proposals to override the 60-vote threshold. Passing a bill through reconciliation process bypasses this rule. The reconciliation spending bill at its current proposal is $3.5 trillion of spending on child care services, community college, and infrastructure. But this price tag is too high for moderate Democratic senators like Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona and Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Manchin is calling for $1.5 trillion in new spending and seems a bit more willing to negotiate. So, Louie, we're going to start this debate with you. Is President Biden's agenda hindered by the seeming infighting in the Democratic Party, or would lowering the price point appeal to Republicans who also take issue with this price?
So I think that what we've seen so far is that the Republicans have been willing to cooperate on the bipartisan bill, but they're not willing to even engage on the other bill, and I think it's going to remain that way. What President Biden needs to focus on is to bring in Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema and find some sort of agreement that keeps as much of the original bill as possible and pass it through the Senate. These are both incredibly important investments, one of which is in physical infrastructure, one of which is in human infrastructure, both of which are long overdue, and we really need to see both of them take effect as soon as possible.
Patrick, what more should the Biden administration be doing to negotiate his agenda and not only get his party on his side, but also appeal to Republicans?
Well, President Biden ran on a platform of uniting the country, but instead he's gone on a single-party approach with the recent reconciliation bill. He's tried to cut Republicans out of the negotiations. He hasn't tried to reach across the aisle, and he can't even unite his own party. I think if President Biden wants to get his legislation through the Congress, he needs to do a better job of listening to the other side of the aisle and doing exactly what he ran on, which is to reach out in a bipartisan fashion. He can't even blame Republicans for this. He can't even get all of the senators in the Democratic Party on his side.
So, Patrick, how will the Republican Party capitalize on this seeming infighting in the Democratic Party to win back Congress in the midterm elections?
Well, Republicans are focused on pocketbook issues like combating inflation and the supply chain crisis. We have a labor shortage that's been the result of the disastrous policies that President Biden has frankly, abdicated on. He's allowed members of his administration to go ahead and engage in corruption. You saw that with the Secretary of Energy. You've seen Secretary Buttigieg absent for the past 2 months, and we're only now just figuring that out in the midst of a supply chain crisis. The Secretary of Transportation doesn't let anyone know that he's out of the office. I think if President Biden wants to actually get down to the issue and solve a lot of the things that Republicans are complaining about, he has some time to do that. But I think in the meantime, Republicans can make the pitch to voters, and that they are the ones that are working to solve issues like inflation, which is a tax on workers. You see that already. Democrats are losing in special elections across the country. A district held by the Democrats for 46 years in Iowa was just flipped 2 days ago. And we have strong nominees in the Virginia and New Jersey off-year elections. So I think that Republicans are doing a good job of capitalizing on some of Biden's failings.
Louie, I think there were some points that you were kind of shaking your head at just then. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to get to all of them. I'd say on the first point with Pete Buttigieg, he just adopted a new child and he's taking advantage of paternity leave. The Department of Transportation is incredibly well staffed, and I'm sure that he's present on many of these discussions, and it's not just him. So I know that Tucker Carlson was talking about that last night on Fox News. I'm not sure the full extent of it. Let's see. And on the other things, I think that the narrative that the Democratic Party is divided, I think, is largely just a product of the media spin on this. You have 48 Democratic senators who are fully behind Joe Biden and his agenda. And I'd say about 95% of House Democrats are the same. There's some loose ends that need to be tied together, and they'll work on that. But I think by and large, the Democrats will be able to pass something. They need to pass something, and come 2022, they could run on all the things that they passed for the American people without any Republican support. Because you see a lot of Republicans going around the country championing the things in the American Rescue Plan, things that they may have worked into the amendment process, but then they didn't vote for the bill. So they're taking credit for something that they didn't actually vote for. So Joe Biden has delivered for the American people, and he will continue to do so.
So, Louie, as you were saying, the Democratic Party does kind of appear fractured, but maybe it's just those two senators that are Manchin and Sinema. But this pricey reconciliation bill and progressives wanting to push the needle a little bit more on that bill compared to the moderates. Manchin also said he wants to reduce the amount of people eligible for the special programs Democrats hope to put in place. So here's Manchin talking about the price tag that he wants.
My top line has been 1.5 because I believe in my heart that what we can do and what the needs we have right now and what we can afford to do without basically changing our whole society to an entitlement mentality.
So, Louie, based off of that sound, how can the Democratic Party move forward with the midterms approaching to appear more united?
So I think that this requires negotiation, and I appreciate Senator Manchin's willingness to express where he's at on the bill. I wish I could say the same about Kyrsten Sinema. They need 50 votes. Right now, they only have 48. Manchin's gonna have to give a little bit too. He's part of a team. Negotiate up to $2 trillion, 2.5. I know Joe Biden said it's about $2 trillion right now, so they're gonna need to negotiate. On Kyrsten Sinema, Senator Sinema, she hasn't even said what she wants to cut, what she wants to include in the bill, and her communications with the press, with everybody, but ostensibly the White House, have been very vague. So I think that in order for us to do well in the midterms, we need to know where both these senators are at. I personally disagree with means testing a lot of these programs, but I think that all Americans stand to benefit from many of the programs included. But these are part of the negotiation process, and they do need to deliver something. So we'll see what happens.
And with that, we're going to end our Capitol Hill debate right there. When we come back, we will take a turn to the southern border. Stay tuned.
Raise high. This isn't just our battle cry. It's our call, our challenge. Because when you were called to Washington, you were called to higher expectations, to a higher standard. We are called here to advance knowledge, to serve society, to change the world. Is that too lofty? Too aspirational? Is it simply too much to expect? Not if your classroom is a Smithsonian, the IMF, or on the doorstep of the Supreme Court. Not if you have access to the most hallowed institutions and formidable leaders. Not if you are given the tools to change minds, shape laws, influence entire fields of study, advance our way of life, change the course of history. From the nation's capital to the four corners of the earth, to far below the surface and far beyond our atmosphere. Here, unique opportunities, the ones that many people work much of their lives to get, are within your reach from the moment you arrive. This is where you find new pathways for preventing global epidemics, where your unexpected friend propels a new scientific movement forward. This is where you push forward as a team to break records and reach new heights. Where your classroom is 68 square miles of the most consequential land on Earth. This is where you will make it happen. This is the George Washington University, and what we make is history. So stand up, be bold, take risks, press on, push harder, raise high.
The southern border is still an issue for the Biden administration. In the midst of a pandemic, the administration wants to keep Title 42 in place, a rule the government uses to justify suspending immigration during a public health crisis. A federal judge blocked the administration from using the rule to justify deportations in September, but the administration is fighting this ruling in court. So, Patrick, we're going to go to you first. Should the Biden administration continue to enforce Title 42?
Well, I think what Biden has to do is he has to listen to the courts. If Title 42 is permissible under the current levels of COVID, I think then it makes sense to do so. It's a useful tool to reduce transmission, especially with the border crisis that's going on now. I think it definitely makes sense to enforce it if the courts permit it. But again, I think because it's under litigation, it's best for the president to proceed with caution and to use much of the existing laws on the books. I mean, you have 160,000 people that have just been released into the country. You have 10,000 people from Haiti that are on the border right now. I think given the levels of COVID in other countries, it's important to make sure that you institute testing and to make sure that we know where these people are going so that we can either contact trace and also make sure that they show up for the hearings that Biden is prescribing them.
So, Louie, Biden positioned himself on the campaign trail as a candidate who would welcome asylum seekers. Why is the administration continuing to fight for this Trump-era rule?
So when Joe Biden took office, the pandemic was spiraling out of control, and the immigration and the surge of migrants along the southern border was another thing that the administration had to contend with. Joe Biden campaigned on being a president who would re-embrace the promise of America, one where oppressed peoples from around the world could seek refuge in the United States. I think that's part of our identity, and that's something that was lost in the previous 4 years. I think that's something that Joe Biden brought back to the White House. Now, with that said, there has to be reform in our immigration system, and this reform is long overdue. And one of the reforms that we need is to reform the asylum system, put more funding into that so we could process asylum claims as people come to the border. And I think that that goes hand in hand with managing the pandemic, and the COVID problem doesn't just exist along the southern border. It exists everywhere in the United States, and I think that the administration needs to take appropriate short-term action on that matter. But I think in the long run, we do not need to have Title 42 in place. I think that it is not it's not really appropriate for the current situation, but for the short term, I think it's necessary.
Well, I certainly think that among the reforms that President Biden needs to look at is ways to restrict and control migration. Even before the recent crisis, the levels of illegal immigration have exploded under President Biden. The border crisis picked up in large part because of the promises that you're talking about. It's not just about renewing America's identity around immigration. Much of the 2019 Democratic debate cycle was spent promising huge benefits to those who would be coming to our country. And it's unfair, frankly, to those people to now have them wait for hearings when they were told they would get all these benefits, and now they're in conditions that are definitely inhumane, and quite frankly, those benefits are not going to come. I think the Democrats have brought this border crisis onto themselves and the country, and I think it's unfortunate.
So I think that the administration has been pretty clear in their messaging on this, dating back to February or March, but the root cause of the issue, which is something that the administration is trying to address. It's one that the previous administration did not touch at all, because they were just confronting the problem along the border with a zero tolerance policy, trying to get to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that you have a country like Haiti, which just had an assassination of their president, and they just had an earthquake which devastated the entire country. And the people who are living there are desperate, and they're searching for a better life. So they're not just coming here because of the promise of all these benefits that have been promised them by Joe Biden or anybody else. They're fleeing the country because they want to go somewhere better, somewhere that is more stable, somewhere they can have a better life for themselves and their families. And I think that is what we need to, that's just the reality of the issue. That's what we need to address.
You can listen to them. They do say that they heard these promises and that they would be let into the country, and instead they're in this situation where Biden is holding them in limbo. And quite frankly, I think that if the Democrats are serious about reforming immigration, they would talk more about programs that can deal with the border crisis, which has exploded under Biden. The levels of illegal immigration exploded when he became president, not because of anything President Trump did. Under President Trump, immigration levels were much lower in terms of undocumented people. And it's not just climate change, as President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris would have us believe. It's not seasonal. This is a border crisis propagated by a lot of these irresponsible discourses around the benefits that would be given out.
I'm going to cut you both off right there, since you're touching on a subject I want to touch on as well, the Haitian immigrants that are coming in. So there is this influx of refugees coming from Haiti due to political unrest and natural disasters, which begs the question, how will climate change worsen the border crisis, which you also kind of touched on a little bit. So Patrick, I'm going to give that question first to you. How will climate change worsen the border crisis, and what should be done?
Well, certainly climate change is a serious issue, and it is in large part one of the reasons why you do have a lot of economic migration throughout the world. I think that because the situation in Haiti was, a natural disaster, and it's recent, but the border crisis has been long-standing throughout the Biden administration. It's not just climate change. In terms of dealing with the root issue of climate change, I think that passing legislation that conserves our environment and provides incentives for more responsible management by fossil fuel companies, by private landowners, I think these sorts of pieces of legislation backed by groups like the American Conservation Coalition are more carrot and less stick, and do better in the long run for America's energy sector and protecting our environment in the long run, and thus reducing any issues with climate-relevant migration.
So Louie, many of these Haitian immigrants are considered climate refugees since they are fleeing mass devastation from recent natural disasters. So how should the Biden administration change their policy to tackle immigration in the midst of climate disasters?
So I think that this speaks to the issue that a lot of these things are very interconnected. And I think one thing a lot of people have commented on with this situation is that that these events are only going to be happening more often, and there's going to be more displaced people, and migrants, refugees, they're going to be arriving along the southern border. So what we need to do now is address the issue. And one of the ways that we can address the issue is bring the international community together in an effort to combat climate change, and to also invest in Central American countries and countries around the world, in helping them develop better infrastructure systems and develop ways to adapt to this changing environment. Because we need to create a sustainable environment for countries around the world, because that will also serve us here better at home.
Family reunifications are also still achingly slow. The Biden administration's task force reunited 52 families of the more than 1,000 separated families in the past 7 months. The Trump administration's lack of a tracking service is presenting to be a large problem for the task force. On the campaign trail, Biden criticized the Trump administration and called the family separations, quote, cruel and senseless. Biden promised that in his first 100 days, he would reverse the family separation policy, but thousands of families are still separated. So Louie, I'm going to go to you first. President Biden made the campaign promise of ending the Trump administration's policy of separating parents and children at the border. Why has Biden not completed this campaign promise, and is the blame partially on Biden?
Well, when we're talking about the reunification effort, the administration can only do so much because there's no documentation there. Of course, Joe Biden's goal, as it is for all Democrats, is to end the zero tolerance policy, which they have done, and to end family separation, which they have done. The problem is that they cannot reunite these families because there's no records that exist. So I think that this is an indictment of the previous administration and their inhumane policy that ripped children from their mother's arms, and that is a terrible thing that will forever be a stain on our country, and it's something that the administration cannot do everything in their power to do. Well, let me rephrase that. They're doing everything in their power, but they just don't have all the resources available because the things like records that should have been kept are non-existent, and that's really unfortunate.
So Patrick, is the Trump administration to blame for the slow family reunification process?
Well, certainly it's evident that Biden, as he has throughout his administration so far, overpromised during the campaign and is now under-delivering. Certainly I think it's unfortunate that you still only have 52 of 1,000 families reunited. I think certainly there were problems during the Trump administration with the family separation policy. It is good to keep these records so that when you try and reunify them, it's more simple. But that being said, the border crisis outside of the family separation issue is still ongoing, and I don't see that President Biden is taking it seriously. I think that if you want to tackle many of the problems with immigration, you need to divert more resources towards securing the border, and you need to do more on enforcing the hearings for the 160,000 that have been released into the country.
And that will be the last word. Up next, rapid fire. Stay with us.
Hi, Colonials. Did you know there are hundreds of ways for you to volunteer with GW? Each year, over 1,500 alumni, parents, and friends contribute thousands of hours to make our community stronger. There are countless ways you can volunteer, so it's easy to choose an opportunity that is most meaningful to you, like connecting with students and alumni based on your student involvement, identity, or personal interests, getting involved with your local alumni network, mentoring a current student via our online mentoring platform, connecting with prospective students through undergraduate admissions opportunities, serving on an industry network leadership council, becoming a social media ambassador. The list goes on. No matter where you are in the world or how much time you have to give, you can connect and volunteer with GW. And the best part, it's easy to get involved. Just visit alumni.gwu.edu/volunteer to learn more about these and other opportunities. Because of your service to GW, you are able to make a direct impact on the lives of former, current, and future students. We look forward to working with you. Raise high.
Our panel now joins us for rapid fire. Some quick answers to some quick questions. Up first, the January 6th House Committee. Over the summer, there was some political theater on the House side with the special commission. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy proposed 5 Republicans to join the committee. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi rejected 2 members, causing McCarthy to pull all Republican nominees. 2 Republicans ended up joining on their own accord, Liz Cheney from Wyoming and Adam Kinzinger from Illinois. The committee recently issued subpoenas for many top Trump administration officials, including the president himself. The Trump administration officials who were subpoenaed are refusing to comply. Trump himself claimed to assert executive privilege to escape the subpoena. In the past week, the Biden administration said they would allow documents from the Trump administration to be turned over and would not use executive privilege. Louie, we're going to go to you first. Is the January 6th committee a necessary endeavor, or is it just stoking the flames of division?
Oh, it's absolutely necessary. I don't think that any of this is political theater per se. This is about just getting to the problem of what happened on January 6th, where you have the President of the United States rally up a mob who stormed the U.S. Capitol, almost murdered the Vice President and the Speaker of the House. It's an incredibly serious thing, and it's something that needs to be looked into. So I think that they need to do everything at their disposal to bring witnesses in and to hold them accountable, because we need answers, and there just have not been a sufficient, there has not been a sufficient level of answers yet, and yeah.
Patrick, same question. Necessary or divisive?
Well, definitely January 6th is a very serious issue, and I think that it is incredibly important that law enforcement gets to the bottom of this. There's dozens of investigations going on. 2 of the 4 people that have been subpoenaed by the committee are apparently in talks with members of the FBI. So I think that there will be some progress on that. That being said, the way that Speaker Pelosi has handled this issue has been divisive and political theater. This is more of a midterm, tool than anything else. They're not really interested in getting to the bottom of anything. They're using this committee for political points, and I think it's incredibly irresponsible to use Jan 6 to try and win an election.
Well, could I touch on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, Speaker Pelosi, the two Republicans that she rejected, I believe, were two who voted against the certification of the election results. So there shouldn't be people on the committee who are there just to grandstand and are proponents of the big lie, the very lie that caused the Capitol to be stormed. So I think that that's totally justifiable. This is a completely unprecedented situation. You cannot compare it really to any other event of its kind, and I think that Speaker Pelosi acted appropriately there.
Well, Democrats in the past have rejected the certification of many states.
Really?
I wouldn't equate
What?
voting against certification to storming the Capitol. Congressman Jim Banks is a very respected member of Congress, and I think he would have been an asset on the committee. Instead, Speaker Pelosi is playing politics with a serious matter, and I think it's unfortunate.
Just to be clear, 2/3 of House Republicans voted against the certification of the 2020 election. 2/3. It's not just like, it's not one Democrat, two Democrats. I know that the right likes to talk a lot about Boxer from California in 2004 as if her objection, which I disagree with, is equivalent to everything that happened after November 2020. It's a complete false equivalency, and it's just not a serious one.
I think the state of discourse and dialogue has been poisoned because of the repeated attempts, whenever a Republican wins an election, to challenge their legitimacy. The Virginia Democrat nominee for governor, Terry McAuliffe, has on numerous occasions questioned the legitimacy of the 2000 and 2004 election, and he's somewhat of a conspiracy theorist at this point. And I think that if Democrats want to be taken seriously on this, they should be consistent. Don't vote against certification and don't question the legitimacy. I think in 2000, 2004, and 2016, you saw Democrats from the Senate and the House and at the state level try and derail the presidencies and the election results. In 2016, there was a concerted effort to convince members of the Electoral College to defect and elect President Hillary Clinton.
We're going to move on to vaccine mandates after that spirited debate. So as the country tops 700,000 deaths due to COVID-19, with recent deaths among the unvaccinated, President Biden has issued a vaccine mandate which will require all federal and healthcare workers to get vaccinated or present a negative COVID test every 2 weeks. The mandate also applies to private companies with more than 100 employees. So Patrick, should the president be regulating private companies, or is this just an overstep of his power?
I think whether it's an overstep of his power remains to be seen. I'd like to see what the courts have to say about it. That being said, vaccines are essential towards ending this pandemic, and I think we should look at policies that increase the rate of vaccination. Whether or not a vaccine mandate will move the needle remains to be seen. It has worked in the past in other countries, but with COVID, I am concerned that a vaccine mandate will have negative implications in the short term and will even harden some of those who are skeptical to the vaccine. You saw thousands of flights be canceled last week due to the vaccine mandate that Southwest instituted. So I don't think that this is necessarily going to be the catch-all solution that President Biden thinks it is. We can see that it's not working out great in the private sector.
Louie?
So I think that President Biden needs to take all actions necessary to keep the American people safe, and I think that there is plenty of legal precedent for vaccine mandates. I know Jacobson versus Massachusetts is often cited, and we'll see how the court interprets that. But I think that the president is well within his authority to work with his administration to have rules that require vaccinations for employment, and these rules have been very effective. So far, there were about 95 million Americans who were unvaccinated before the mandate took effect, and I believe that number is down to 65 million. So it's making a lot of progress, and this I'd say fear-mongering amongst many on the right about this leading to a massive resignations is just not true. Like when United Airlines implemented the vaccine mandate, they had like a 99.7% compliance rate, which is just off the charts. So this is, I think, a very important measure and will get us back to normal.
So a Facebook whistleblower recently testified before Congress and claimed the social media company has been well aware of how harmful some content can be, especially for children's mental health. But the whistleblower says the company refuses to take action in the name of profit. So Louie, what role should the government play in regulating big tech?
So I think that the government has a role here to oversee the operations of Facebook, Twitter, and any other big tech company. I think that there are questions that can be raised about the companies acting in a very monopolistic, anti-competitive fashion. I think that appropriate action needs to be taken there, because what Facebook has been able to get away with over the last 3-4 years is completely unacceptable. They're taking advantage of younger children for profit, which is just absolutely reprehensible. And when we talk about 2016, how the Russians were able to use Facebook to spread disinformation, and Facebook failed to really do anything about that, and that was able to tip the outcome, some say, of the presidential election here. These are all things that need to be looked into.
Patrick, I'll give you the last word on that.
Well, I will agree with Louie on the need to look at the behavior of these big tech companies. There is some evidence in the past few years that they are engaging in potential monopolistic action. They're undercutting their competition. They're buying out anyone who seems to rise up and diminish their hegemony. That being said, I won't engage in the Russian conspiracy theory.
Not a conspiracy theory. It's clearly documented, Patrick. Like, it is clearly documented that they interfered in the 2016 election.
Yeah.
I mean, like this goes back to your point, and I'm sorry I didn't respond earlier to that. In relation to what Terry McAuliffe was saying, he was contesting Bush v. Gore, which I think that many people say was a wrongly decided decision that stopped the recount in Florida, for example. And the other things about Democrats raising objections to how the elections were conducted, those generally fall along the lines of voter suppression, people not being able to cast their ballots. It's nothing remotely comparable to the lie that was propagated after the November 3rd election, where Donald Trump was setting up a pretense to discredit the results because he thought he was going to lose, and he's been carrying that lie to this very day. And I think that's been very corrosive for democracy. Just as corrosive, I'd say even more corrosive than what Facebook has done. And Facebook has caused a lot of damage.
Well, I don't think Facebook rigged the election. I don't think Russia changed a single vote, but pluralities of Democrats after 2016 did. And that's a result of some of the irresponsible rhetoric of leaders in the Democratic Party. And on the issue of big tech, you see that the people in charge of the Democrats' effort to regulate big tech, people like my home state Senator Blumenthal, are out of touch. They're calling for Facebook to ban Finstas, and is clearly not equipped for this. I think we definitely need a new generation of Republican leadership that is serious about regulating big tech, because we can't have these tech companies undermining people's privacy. We can't have them undermining people's First Amendment rights. And in a pandemic, I mean, they clearly were the public square for millions of people. I think it's important that we reconsider their role in how the government treats them.
So I would agree with Patrick in the sense that Facebook and Twitter have a responsibility to ensure that the information on their platforms are accurate and that bad actors cannot go on there and spread discord, because that is the goal of people in Russia. Like, I understand that Russia didn't change a single vote in the 2016 election, but they were able to put out information that misled a lot of people. These lies that like Hillary Clinton was equivalent to Satan, things like that, just like complete troll farms who are able to operate openly on the Facebook platform. And that's unacceptable. So of course they didn't tamper with the vote count, but that doesn't mean that they were able to allow for Russian disinformation campaigns to change a lot of minds. And that's an unfortunate thing.
Patrick, I'm going to let you have the last word, then we're going to wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that these tech companies are serious threats to elections in some ways. I think if you want to talk about what Facebook did in 2016, you can also look at the fact that Facebook and Twitter worked together to try and squash the Hunter Biden story right before people went to the polls. So I definitely think that we need to look at the antitrust legislation and laws on the books so that we can try and get a handle on these big, out-of-control tech companies.
And well, that wraps up our first Capitol Crossfire debate of the semester. Patrick Burland, Louie, Kahn, thank you both for joining me today, and I hope your roommate relationship is still intact. But when we come back, Kyle Anderson will have your fact check.
Universities like George Washington play a critical role in hosting debate and discourse on events of the day.
The right answer is not to refuse the other. The right answer is not to say, get rid of this religion. It's not part of us. It's wrong.
I think that the story of America is a story of race. So when I think of the questions that I'm asking or the stories that I'm going to write, I'm thinking, okay, well, what are we learning about our country?
Well, I think the likelihood of him being indicted is close to 100%. There was a lot of hurdles that had to be cleared in order for that to happen.
One of the reasons that Donald Trump is president is because there is such a frustration with the way that Washington functions.
Sympathy is one thing, but empathy is the language of recovery, and it's something that's, without a doubt, instilled into every person that's in recovery.
It's never lead with the positive, it's always lead with the perceived negative.
Well, that is part of the problem. I mean, I actually would agree with you on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the things that we have seen that is most under siege in this country is the notion of civil discourse, and we here at GW, among other things, very much want to stand for that.
This is truly an only at GW moment.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact checkers monitored our debate. Kyle Anderson is here to tell us what we missed. Kyle?
Thanks, Jessica. That was a fantastic and robust debate. However, the fact check team did find a few errors that need to be corrected. During the debate, Republican Patrick Burland claimed there was corruption present in the Biden cabinet, including Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm. The fact check team was unable to find any evidence supporting such claims. Burland also claimed that 160,000 immigrants were released into the country largely unsupervised by the Biden administration. These reports stem from a document obtained by Fox News, which was allegedly leaked from the Department of Homeland Security. These reports, however, have yet to be corroborated by any other journalistic outlets. Burland also claimed that thousands of flights were canceled as a result of a pilot protest against vaccine requirements. These claims, spurred by Republican lawmakers, are untrue. According to the FAA, Southwest Airlines, and the Southwest Pilots Union, flights were canceled due to a mix of bad weather and staffing shortages. Finally, Democrat Louie Kahn asserted that Russia and Facebook had a considerable effect on the outcome of the 2016 election. While the intelligence community has confirmed Russian interference, it is at best unclear how large of an effect the interference had and what role Facebook played. And that's it from the Fact Check team.
Thanks, Kyle. Well, that's all for this episode of Capitol Crossfire. Be sure to check us out online at gw-tv.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and like us on Facebook. For all of us at GWTV, I'm Jessica Nix. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you back here next time.